I'm so glad that you've taken the time to join me for this session, because it just shows me that you're, the 113 people so far signed up, but so many people interested in going a step further to try to improve, because we face so many problems in teaching and learning, and to find a few tips and tricks and ideas to sort of do that more efficiently, it's a great thing. Okay, so what are we talking about tonight? We have really 7 main ideas that I would like to cover. And sorry, I'm saying tonight because it's tonight in Montreal, but I know it's morning for many of you. So we've got 7 ideas here. So the first of all, we've got a goal, which is our big goal. We're talking about listening and speaking and fluency. That's what we aim for. We want our students to be fluent. Why do young learners listen? Well, it's kind of an interesting question, right? Because at different ages, we all listen for different reasons. I mean, an adult and a teenager and a young learner, they all have different reasons for listening, and the same for speaking. They talk for very particular reasons. Young learners, I can just say right off the bat, for example, they're not as good at making small talk. Old people, adults, they love to make small talk. They chat with each other and, oh, nice weather we're having today and things like that. Young kids never talk like that. They don't make small talk. They have different purposes for listening and for speaking. So we're going to explore those. Young learners reading and writing. My interest here is really, how does that impact on their listening and speaking? So we'll explore that. And then teaching, listening, and speaking. That's what we're, want to get some ideas here, how to do things a little bit differently and maybe better. And some specific challenges that we face. And then teaching every student. This is something that I added late because I was really thinking about some of the problems, some of the really serious problems that we face in the classroom. And I wanted to talk about some of those. Basically, the idea of teaching every student and not leaving any student behind. So let's begin. So before we do, I just want to, first of all, a big thank you to eFuture for sponsoring this, giving me the chance to speak to all of you. And I'm going to be also using some examples through part of this of Smart English, the second edition. What's the second edition? Okay, so you bring out a book, you all those editors and all those writers and designers and the computer programmers, and everybody works so hard, but it doesn't stop there with a publisher. Publisher has to think, okay, could it be better? So they go out, they talk to you, they visit classrooms, they see how it's being used, they come back with some ideas. Could we have some more of this? We'd like some more of this, or this isn't working the way it should. What do you suggest? And they come back and they look and they improve things for a second edition. So that's what that's about. Okay, let's go back to our 7 points. We start off with the goal, which is listening and speaking fluency. Where do we go from there? Students achieve fluency at different rates. So this is a big thing. We always have to accept that not all our students are equal. I think before we start teaching, like when we're young teacher trainings, we think, oh yes, all the students will be at the same level, but they are never at the same level. But there's a lot of things that can help to even things out. The first of all is students can help each other. Always remember that you are not the only teacher in the classroom. You have 30 teachers. You have students who can help to teach each other. And if you're not taking advantage of that resource, you're working too hard. Always find opportunities where you think one student is a little bit ahead and maybe one's a little bit behind. Put them together, let them work together. Even just changing the seats can make a huge difference. There's different factors that impact upon fluency. First of all, what's their first language fluency? Now, some people speak extremely well. They're very fluent and they just natter on all the time. There was a young boy in Switzerland, and he was growing up, and he was 5 years old, and he had never said a word. His parents thought, maybe there's something the matter with his brain, and they worried that he would never, ever, ever speak. And finally, at dinner one night, he's eating the soup at dinner, and suddenly he says his first words. He says, The soup is too hot. What a thing to say. The mother, the father, everybody's astonished. His brothers and sisters, they're all looking at him. They say, Albert, he says, you've spoken. He says, why didn't you speak before? And he said, the soup was not hot before. It's a famous story, and maybe you've heard it, because the Albert, of course, was Albert Einstein, right? So people, they come into fluency in different stages and different ages and different ways. So sometimes it's their first language fluency has an impact. It's the effort that they put into it. And some students are really, really putting a lot of effort at this age, ages 7 to 12, often because they see it as a fun game. Learning a language is that secret code. And if you can sort of impress that idea that it's like talking in a secret code, you can talk to your friends without anybody knowing what you're saying in English, right? Your parents won't know. Oh, that can be very exciting for them in many ways. Time spent at home, reading, writing, and speaking, and of course, listening as well. If they have any opportunity to use English when they're outside of your classroom, that's going to impact on their fluency. But what is fluency made up of? Well, this is a really difficult question. I can see some of you tearing your hair out already. Okay, I'm going to say that there's 4 components, right? But actually, if you just Google this later, you'll find that there's 3. Some people say 5. Some people will say 7. There's too many. Okay, I'm just going to focus on these 4. I would say that for fluency, we really need accuracy, speed, expression, and comprehension. You can guess what some of these mean, but what do they mean exactly? Well, starting off with accuracy. Accuracy is sort of saying the word correctly. And to do that, sounding out words and breaking them into chunks, that's important. But students need to avoid constant pauses. They cannot go through and say sounding out words. And, it's too much. It's too much. They have to be able to know the words. And once they know the words, and some people say that to a 98% accuracy, so they stop thinking about the words themselves, and they're thinking about what they have to say, what they're reading or what they're saying, and they're not focusing on the decoding. The decoding is extremely important, and we have to go through those steps, but it is a purpose to get to accuracy. So we teach decoding so that students can learn those words, remember those words, and use them. How do we teach this? How do we teach accuracy? Well, we have to encourage students to read and reread text. Now, when I say this, I mean both silently and reading aloud. So read it and reread. This rereading thing is so important. Go over those materials again and again and again and tell the students, hey, this weekend, go back into your book, have a look at your reading and go through it again. Read it aloud a couple of times. Practice, right? It doesn't matter what they're reading, really. In fact, the phone book would be fine with me. Do people have phone books anymore? I'm not sure. They could be poems or stories or short age-appropriate novels for the students, depending on their level and what they're comfortable with. Each time a student reread a text, they absorb and they absorb different parts of the language. You don't have to tell them to do it. If you tell them to say, oh, yes, you'll learn about this and this, no, you just say, just read it again. They will discover new things every time they do. And if they're reading aloud, they're going to practice in new ways. Speed is the second of the 4 things. Speed is important, but only if students understand and confidently express the words that they're reading or using. Now, speed is just being able to get your ideas out. And for young kids, it's particularly important because if you speak too slowly, even as adults, what happens? You get interrupted. If you're saying, I'd like a meal. Are you hungry? No. I'd like a bear. What do you want? People interrupt, say, I want a book. And they don't get to the point, so other people interrupt them. So speed is kind of an important thing to getting your ideas across, or they get lost. A teaching speed, how do we do it? At the word level, try using flashcards in class, reusing the most difficult words week after week. So this is important for you to do as a teacher and say, oh yeah, the students were really having difficulty with this word difficult or something. So I'm going to teach that again next week. I'm going to make sure that I keep using it when I'm talking to them so they're exposed to it more. Encourage students to create their own flashcards. Why? Should they do this themselves? Because some students will learn some words and some will not. And they need to focus on the ones that they need to learn. Another trick is to extend this into sentences. So you can have flashcards for words, and we're very used to that, but try doing flashcards for sentences. Write a short sentence using the word, and then it makes it much better as well. That's really going to help them to teach them speed if they read those sentences over and over again, not just the word. Expression is the third one. Expression is about making what students read aloud sound like spoken language. So what do I mean by that? Well, you wouldn't expect me to read this. Expression is about making what students read sound like spoken language. Sounds like a robot teaching or something. Yeah, it doesn't sound human, right? It's not really what we're looking for. When we do read aloud from something, or when we're speaking, we put a lot of emphasis into it in different ways. That emphasis is often emotional. Components include appropriate emotions. Like if you're telling a joke, you have to tell it in a certain way. If you're telling a horror story, then it has to, has pauses and, tension and whispering. There's all different ways. And for that reason, try to expose students to a lot of different genres. So anyway, when speaking and reading aloud, pausing for punctuation like commas and periods is very important, and emphasizing key words. How do we teach this? Here's a trick, is from one or more longer stories, assign each student the task of learning one part. It depends on your students. One part could be a paragraph or a page, or it could just be one sentence if it's a short story. And then you have a class, you have 30 students, you give each one sentence and say, that's your job, just to learn to really say that with expression. And you give them time to practice, with each other. And then you put on kind of a performance, a written performance, a spoken performance of what. Again, by that point, if it's just a sentence, they shouldn't have to read from the page. If it's a paragraph, they probably still need to do that, but maybe not. Maybe if they practice, they should be able to do it more or less perfectly. So it's a great thing. By focusing on one small thing like this, you think, well, no, that's not the focus of the whole class. We're trying to teach them more expansive, but actually this will help drill them and will build confidence for them. Making sure they understand each word, have students practice their part, adding expression for group read-alouds in class. Okay, the fourth one of the four should be maybe the first one, which is comprehension. So fluency is a bridge between decoding words and comprehending them. So you really have to sort of start off understanding what the word, decoding so you can pronounce them, but you also have to understand them, and the two go together. When students improve their fluency, they know and understand the words they use and can communicate messages. So all of a sudden it becomes a valuable tool. It's not just individual words, it becomes, something. Just as a little trick here, always ask your students to answer in full sentences. I had a teacher who did this. It drove me crazy, but she was right. It was a great thing to do. And so, say, so how are you today? Fine. No, say, how are you today? I'm fine today, Dr. Beatty. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's good to hear, right? It just forces them into this situation where they're using more language. So it's a good thing. How do we teach comprehension? When teaching new vocabulary, it's important to tie it to students' own lives. So if I was teaching the word important, what would I do? I'd say to my students, okay, everybody talk to each other. What is the most important thing in your life? What's one important thing in your life? And somebody said, oh, my dog, right? Something, oh, my telephone, something, my judo class or something like that, whatever. I don't care what it is. But all of a sudden, that word important means something that's really personal to them. And it's by personalizing language that students really remember it. So have them use the words in sentences that are true for them. My dog is important to me, right? So that's great. Then they won't forget that. But if you just say important, spell it out, remember it. How do you spell it? Here it's on a list. There'll be a test on it tomorrow. They're not going to remember it as well. Or they might remember it for the test, but not for life. The more ways they can use the vocabulary also is going to help with their comprehension. You think, well, no, isn't it they just learn it like reading a dictionary? Yeah, it's sticking it in the mind. It's not just learning it and seeing once what it is, but it's actually remembering is an act of using it over and over and over again. And I think the best way to do that is not just by doing the same thing, like writing it out 100 times. It's by speaking, by writing, in songs, in chants. They're going to remember it better that way. And, that's why many textbooks integrate these tasks. That's the purpose. Okay, get parents and other family involved. This is a big trick. Students learn language by using it. So get parents and family members, including siblings, if they have older siblings, and grandparents to help. Even having someone sit and listen to a student read works, even if they don't understand the language, right? So maybe you have parents who don't speak English or grandparents who don't speak English. It doesn't matter. First of all, the child can teach the grandparents English. How delightful is that? But just having somebody there listen to you as you read aloud as an act, it helps the student to learn much better. It's great if that person can offer advice, but if they just sit and listen, that is still a positive thing. So talk to your parents, get them involved. Second point out of the 7, why do young learners listen? Okay, remember we all listen in different ways and for different reasons as we age. Can we turn off our listening? We can close our eyes, and yes, we can cover our ears, but most of the time we can't avoid listening. I find this an interesting concept. I remember when I was first went to China. I lived in China for 4 years, Hong Kong for 12. And when I first went to China, I had a friend also from Canada who spoke Chinese. She'd studied Chinese as a second language. And we were out one time, and I think maybe we were on a bus, and there were some people next to us talking. And I asked her, I said, what are they talking about? And she said, I don't know. I wasn't listening. And I thought, how could you not be listening? You're just sitting there. But I sort of realized that she wasn't focusing. So not all listening is the same. A lot of what we hear just becomes background noise unless we attend, means unless we pay attention. So to attend is to focus on what we're hearing. So when we say pay attention, please, it's because we're trying to get students to focus. So we have to teach that as a skill, focus, pay attention. Everyone has a reason to listen, but young learners are different. They listen because they're curious. They listen because they need information. They listen, they want to understand something. Maybe they're curious, they want to learn something, right? Or they want to be entertained. They're listening for all these reasons. You're saying, oh, come on, I'm an adult. I listen to all of those things, right? Here's something they don't do. Young kids do not listen to be polite. It takes a long time to learn that, and they simply don't. You look at them. They if you start talking and they're bored, they just turn their head. They walk away out of the room. It's just like, hey, I was talking to you. They're not interested. They're just out of there. So this is something that adults do, and we learn to do is we listen to be polite, even though we'd rather be running away, right? We should teach active listening to students, and this is often taught to higher level students, but I think you can start when they're very young. Focus on the message, not what you will say next. So don't just be thinking what you want to say. Think, really listen, say, do you understand what that person is saying? Avoid distractions. Look at the person, focus on their face. Look at them, listen. Don't be looking at your phone. Don't be wandering around. Don't be doing something with your hands while you're talking. Show you're listening. Show the person you're listening. Use your body language and gestures facing forward. Smile, nod. Encourage the speaker. Say yes, yes, yeah. Students have to learn this. They don't know it naturally. They have to learn these things. And then give feedback. Paraphrase. It's a big word for little kids. You have to explain it in a different way, but paraphrase. Just use different words to say, to make sure that you understand. So what you're saying is, I should do this, right? You're paraphrasing. Ask questions to clarify. What do you mean later? What's later? Like tonight? And then summarize. Say, oh, I get it. So you mean this, right? And then again, you're clarifying. So these are important. Why is listening so important? Well, for young learners in particular, it's more important than for older students because it is one of the ways that we build empathy and responsibility. What do I mean, empathy? You listen, when you start to learn to listen to people, then you start to understand their problems. If somebody's telling you a problem, you think, oh, I'm bored, I'm just walking away. Well, that's what little kids do. They just walk away. They're not interested because they're not really listening and putting themselves in the place of that other person. So listening is a key strategy for doing that. The other one is responsibility. You have to listen and pay attention to things. People may be telling you something important, and you have to listen and figure out that if they're telling you to do something that you need to do, even if you don't want to do it. And so you have to listen. So you learn that. Okay. Number 3, we've talked about listening. What about speaking, right? Learners speak, again, for very particular reasons. They persuade. They want to persuade. Let's do this. They want to inform somebody. Hey, see what I saw. They want to entertain each other. That's extremely important. They want to share problems. Say, oh, I hurt my finger. They want to make plans. And mostly they want to be social. So this being social is the big thing. They're not learning language to succeed in business or, because they're going to, want to get a PhD in English or something like that. It's not their focus whatsoever. And there's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons for speaking, but young learners, they mostly want to speak in order to be social. That's their main function. If they're talking with other students. If they are doing something happily by themselves, they're not talking, right? So how do we turn learners' interest in being social into listening and speaking opportunities? Well, basically young learners want to say what they say to be validated by their peers, whatever their purpose in speaking. So if they're explaining things or trying to persuade people or anything else, they want other students to listen and say, yes, that's a good idea. Or they want to engage them or somehow convert them in some way. So we have to create some sort of opportunities to let students shine. And I think this is what we do most importantly as teachers. And I include everyone from kindergarten up to my graduate and doctoral students. I'm always looking for a chance to let them shine, to let them show what they can do to their peers, because they feel great about themselves, right? With support, ask them to explain something, to tell a joke, to share a story, to demonstrate a skill, to answer a question from another student. You don't always have to answer all the questions. When a student asks something in class, say, that's a great question, George. Say, okay, Juan, can you explain that? Or can anybody else explain that to George? And again, it's this chance to shine. So it becomes social, but it also becomes something where they feel validated in speaking. So the reason for speaking is very strong. Young learners, 4th point, is young learners reading and writing. Okay, we've talked about listening, we've talked about speaking. What about reading and writing in terms of listening and speaking, right? Okay, so here's some good advice. I'm sure you've heard this before. This is from Lindsay, 2005. Hear a word before you can say it. Say a word before you can read it. Read a word before you can write it. Okay, sounds good, but why? Why do we say all that? Okay, so hearing a word before you can say it, is just simply a way of tying the sound of the word and what it is, and getting comprehension in there. So it's really about that comprehension, about that expression. So how do you pronounce it exactly? You know, where's the stress fall in the word, the intonation? So hearing is important, and that's why you want to do that. You want to say a word, though, before you read it. Why not just read the words? Well, you want to do that because English is a terrible language. I'm sorry to say that. George Bernard Shaw used the example of goatee, G-H-O-T-I. He said, how do you say this word? G-H-O-T-I. And he said, fish. You pronounce it fish. They said, what? They said, G-H, that's the F in enough, right? Enough. So you got that F sound. O as in women, right? So you got that I sound. And T-I as in nation, T-I, sure. So fish, G-H-O-T-I. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous language, actually. We have so many words borrowed from other words that it can be very, very confusing if students read a word and try to pronounce it before they've heard it. So get them to hear it, get them to say it, and then reading it. And then, of course, they want to read the word before they write it, because then they've got to, again, that's all about the connection that's connecting, what they're reading and to what they're writing. Okay. Sorry, here we are. Okay, so timing. Students reading words before they've had a chance to hear them can lead to confusion and pronunciation errors. So I do have a PhD, and my wife and my two sons do think I'm an idiot. Why? Well, one of the reasons, you have no respect whatsoever. One of the reasons is robot. For some reason, I read a lot of science fiction when I was a very young kid. And for some reason, I started very, very young mispronouncing the word robot. I said robot. I don't know why, but I did. And once I started, it became fossilized and I couldn't stop myself. And my wife thought it was hilarious. She said, it's not robot, it's robot and stuff. And it took her years to really correct me and things like that. And that's because I read it before I heard it. Another one is a legacy. Now, young learners are natural problem solvers, and a lot of what they learn in language, it has to do with just solving these little problems and looking at words and trying to figure out how to pronounce them. And this was one for me again. Legacy, I read the word. I didn't know how to pronounce it, but I thought, oh, I know the word legend. So it must be legacy. And so I thought it was legacy. And who did I say this in front of? Probably lots of people who just didn't know what I was saying. But I met the director of the Provincial Museum in British Columbia, and I had a meeting, and I said legacy, and he said, "What's a legacy?" And I said, well, and he said, oh, and he was so kind. He said, oh, I've never heard it pronounced that way. I just say legacy myself. Oh, I felt so stupid. Anyway, yeah. So as I say, no respect in my house. Okay, textbooks control the language. So that's one of the great things they do it. And you cannot imagine how much work goes into choosing the words that go into a textbook, making sure that they are not confusing. So that's very fortunate. So we see a lot of that. But be sure to teach local vocabulary at the same time. This is a very funny example from when I was younger. Timmy the West Coast tugboat, right? And it was a very, very popular book when I was a kid. But there was a big controversy because it wasn't allowed in the schools. It wasn't picked up by the schools. It was the most popular book that year in British Columbia. And the libraries, none of the school libraries would buy it. And so people were outraged, and they said, why? And so finally they came back and they said, well, because it has the name, the Queen Charlotte Islands in it. And that's too difficult for that age level. Say, well, what about the kids who live in the Queen Charlotte Islands? Queen Charlotte Islands, right? It was a ridiculous argument, and then they changed their minds, and they did. They since renamed them Haida Gwaii, given them a First Nations Indian name. But again, students should learn local words, even if they're difficult. The local food, the cultural practices, the dances, the songs, the names of cities and places. All of that's important. So teach that, even if it seems like difficult vocabulary. Fifth one, teaching, listening, and speaking. Okay, now we're getting much more into the meat of things. We've had a few tips and tricks now so far, but I wanted to focus on something a little bit different. Almost all of us when we have young learners, we're always using a textbook. And I don't care what textbook you use. I didn't write this one, but I just wanted to give you some examples from using this as a textbook. And it would really, the principles, if you're teaching older students or younger students who maybe don't use this, or even adults, the principles are going to be quite similar. So let's start here. The question is, what can we do to build more listening and speaking activities into our lessons? That's really what I'd like to focus on, because I think there's never enough. Of course, you're going to cover the basics, start off. And this is a listening and speaking book, so it's already focused on that. So it makes sense to use all of the resources. But when I say all of the resources, make sure you find out what all those resources are. I've used other textbooks and I say, oh, and how do you like the app? Oh, is there an app? Well, there is an app. How do your students like using the online materials? Oh, I didn't know there was online materials. Spend some time, find out everything that your book comes with. Otherwise, it's like buying a new car and saying, oh, I didn't realize it had a back seat. Of course, you have to pay attention and see what you have there. And so find out about all of those additional resources. And again, this particular series has online and other resources, and the teacher's book, of course, as well. One little thing that I like here is this is a clever problem. It's always the problem, how do you personalize the content? So you'll see on this page is these little sort of ghostly character. I love it. So cute. And it's basically just so you can personalize the content with the students, something I've been talking about already. So build on the language functions. So this is the first tip. So what do I mean by language functions? Okay, well, let's look at this dialogue, which is quite simple, but what exactly is going on in this dialogue? We've got, I'm hot, and let's go swimming at the beach. It's a problem and a solution. See, problem, solution. That's what it's doing in terms of discourse. The second one, put on your swimsuits. Okay, Mom. It's a suggestion or a command and agreement. The query and response is the next one. Are you ready? Yes, Dad. So that's a response, but also an imperative. Let's go, right? Let's go. So this, again, you could say that's a suggestion. And then finally, what are you wearing, Dad? It's my new diving suit. So that's a question and an answer. So it's your turn task. Ask students to use creative substitutions. So they're just changing one word. I'm hot, and change that. I say, I'm hungry. What else could you say? I'm cold. What else could you say? And keep going. I'm tired. I'm, angry. I'm whatever. And what other language that they've learned? And again, it will help to reinforce everything and extend this small activity into something much larger. So build on the language functions. It's just something to do. The next one is beware of the fake musician. What is this about? It's actually an old Chinese story. It's an old Chinese fable. And it was this man was unemployed and his friend was in the orchestra for the emperor. And he said, why don't you join the orchestra? He says, I don't know how to play an instrument. He says, okay, just buy a pipa, a lute, Chinese lute. He said, you can there's 50 lute players. You can sit with them and just pretend, right? And then finally one day the emperor decided he wanted to hear each musician play one at a time, and the man had to run away. What's the point of the story? The point of the story is that don't always just ask the students to read everything together. You want to give them a chance to do it themselves, and you want to hear each one as well. Move from individual to pair to small group to class and then back again. So give students a chance to build their confidence. So say, okay, we're going to be reading this out in front of everyone, but first, just try it by yourself, right? And then try it with your partner. Once you're confident, get in a little group, try it there, and then we'll do it all together as a class. But then I want to hear some of you, right? Doing it by yourselves. So you're doing that. But the purpose is to build confidence. No one's going to remember anything if they don't feel good about it. And again, this goes back to my idea of let your students shine. Let them feel good about themselves. Focus on language differences. When students need additional practice, look for opportunities to explore the key language and grammar points in other ways. Say, what's the language here? Oh, a river. Say, oh, who knows a river? You say, oh, St. Lawrence River in Montreal, right? How about a volcano? Has anybody seen a volcano? Where do we find? Oh, Hawaii. Hawaii, they've got lots of volcanoes, right? And so you get them finding, using other language and other ideas they have and tying it to the language that's there. What are the closest mountains, or have you been to the mountains? And questions about that. So just look at any of the language and the grammar and start playing with that. The grammar is, did he go to? Did they go to? So again, you're just going to substitute other words there. Chants are extremely important, but you have to think about why, and how do they differ from songs? They are different, right? Chants help to improve stress and intonation. Where did she go on vacation? Where did she go on vacation? Where did she go on vacation? Did she go to an island? Did she go to an island, right? So, and you can say it in different ways, and I think the recording probably says it differently. It is recorded for you, but you can find different ways that it's being said, and you can experiment and play with that. And then you can ask students to create their own chants. So instead of saying, where did she go to the vacation? Say, oh, what have we just learned? Rivers and mountains. She crossed a river to the mountains, right? Oh, okay. She crossed the river to the mountains. She crossed a river to the mountains. It's easy to write chants. So get the students doing that. Why? Why not just do what's there? You want to expand the activity, but also once you start teaching students to do that, you are giving them a kind of an earworm, we say. So they start thinking about it outside of class, so they'll continue using it. So that's a good thing. Review sections are something else. So review sections, we can always use them in two different ways. First of all, you can always use them as a preview task. So you say, listen, on Monday, we're going to be working on page 25. So have a look at it. It's the review. Okay. So before we do the review, I want you all to read it and try answering the questions, right? So ask your friend to write yes or no, you can do it themselves or whatever, and then other things, right? So basically they're playing with all of that language. But you can also use it as a review when you do it in class, but use it throughout the year. You always have 5 minutes left at the end of a class or 10 minutes left at the end of the class. Class, turn back to page 25. Let's look at that language again. I know some of you had problems. Let's go through it again and keep going through different parts of the book to review it. Students forget, right? So go through it again. Also give students a chance to show what they know, to show what they knew. By this, I mean, students have a lot of language already. They pick it up in different places. They play video games, they watch TV, they see different shows, and they'll learn a language from friends and from relatives. So you look at this picture here, and it is so rich. It's so rich with different vocabulary. What do you see? Oh, he's got a paddle or an oar, right? He's in a boat. I see a dock. There's a little lake there. Oh, there's a flag on the castle. Like, think about all the language. What's she holding? A camera. What's he holding? Is that a camera? No, it's a telescope, right? What's the difference between a telescope and a microscope? So much language here, but give students a chance to pull out as many words as they can. If you want to make it a game, say it's a game. Okay, everybody in a group of 5 and figure out as many words as you can name, and they work together. And if they're working together, they're teaching each other these words. So fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. It's a great activity. Same thing, after every second unit in this particular book, there are this jump up to, which sort of is a review activity as well. Use it the same way. Again, look at the richness of the images and the cartoons and do that. Something I love here is watch and act. Getting students to physically do things in the classroom using the language while they listen and speak is really, really important. It's really important so they can act out the little story. Sing. So I mentioned earlier, singing, it's different. It's different than chanting. Songs naturally encourage fluency because they set up a pace for students to keep up. They also do a lot more work with intonation and that sort of emotional thing about the language as well. Expression, right? We talked about expression as being important. It also lowers their affective filters. That means that they are less nervous about speaking because it's a song. They join in, they're going to be louder, they're going to have more fun, they're keeping up, and they don't worry so much about making mistakes or appearing foolish in some way. Okay, so teach songs in steps. How? Well, let's go back to those 4 aspects of fluency again. Accuracy, how do you say the words correctly? Speed, how do you go quickly through it and make sure you're keeping up? How do you express it? So let's go swimming at the beach, so showing some excitement, emotion about what they're saying. And comprehension, make sure you really, really understand what all of the words are and how all of the words going together. I look at this and I know there's going to be 2 problems. I see those 2 problems right away. Let's go swimming at the beach, at the preposition, right? Preposition of place. Let's go hiking in the mountains. Now, again, you can just listen, see if the students make mistakes with those, but then you have to teach them. Maybe we'll see. A reading task. The reading task integrates all the vocabulary and the grammar that they've learned so far. Fantastic. But again, as a listening and speaking activity, turn the reading tasks into listening and speaking tasks. Make sure students have a high degree of comprehension. They really understand what's going on there. Have them read aloud. Again, those 4 things: accuracy, speed, and expression, and comprehension, right? Try conversion exercises. It's a fun thing to do. Change, for example, my to her. Or was to is. You're playing with the grammar, right? So you're playing with the personal pronouns. So change other sorts of things like that. You'd say, find the opposites of some things. Instead of very large and very deep, it was very small and very shallow, right? So, the view from the top was truly amazing, was truly disappointing or something. They'll say it in their own language, but getting those ideas across. Number 6, I remember we have 7 altogether. Challenges in teaching and learning, lots of challenges. I would say the 5 that I'm just focusing on right now, and I'm sure you're thinking of other ones, but time, motivation, participation, individual attention, and learning but forgetting. Okay, let's talk about these one at a time. There's never enough time to learn a language in a classroom. Students need language learning opportunities outside of class. So they need to focus on learning outside of class. Even if you see your students 5 hours a week for 10 hours a week, still, it helps out if they're doing something outside of class. One thing to do is to create mini projects outside of class that focus on students' varied interests. Make a video about your favorite hobby or sport, right? Video, easy. Everybody has a phone. Let them use their phone and make a short video or take some photographs and do that. And again, what are they doing? They're shining. We're giving them an opportunity to shine because they're going to share something that they're proud of, that they're excited about. It could be anything, right? Yeah. Oh, I made empanadas with my mom. Here's I took a little video or something, right? Whatever it is. The second one is motivation. Here's a really interesting idea. And I'm going to tell you this, and you're going to think, oh, I've never heard that before. That's silly. No one can see more than half their lives in front of them. What? Okay, let me explain. A 4-year-old can only imagine being 6. A 4-year-old does not think about being a teenager, right? If you're 12 years old, you can maybe imagine being 18, but you can't imagine being in your 30s. You just can't do that. And little kids can't think like, yeah, when I retire in 50 years, I'll use English to travel. They're not thinking about that. Most young learners cannot see how learning a language will help them in the short term because, again, they don't really see what the big advantage is. And later on, you can tell them, say, oh, this will be so useful when you're older. You can travel around the world. Think, oh, I can't imagine that. It's just not realistic for them. Instead, ask the class to brainstorm reasons for learning English. Students are more likely to understand and respect the peers' ideas than ones from the teachers, and they might actually draw on their parents and relatives say, oh, my mom is a police officer and she uses English, or my father is a doctor and he uses English, right? And then, that becomes more realistic for them. Participation, students can be reluctant to participate in class for many reasons. The biggest is that they do not want to appear silly. They don't want anybody making fun of them. They don't want to make a mistake, so it's better not to do anything at all. It's not really acceptable. Examine the students' reasons for not participating. Sometimes maybe you're too quick to correct them. And sometimes your corrections are too harsh and makes them feel bad about themselves. So they don't see, why should I try? Do they not understand the task, or have they not had enough time for preparation? Again, this idea of having them work in pairs and then small groups and then as a class is okay. And make room for happy failures. Which by means, if somebody makes a mistake, so you laugh together about it and say, oh, do you think that's right? I say things like that. Do you understand her? And make it more fun. Don't say, no, that's wrong. Next, that's not encouraging. The fourth is individual attention. How do your students differ from each other? Every student is a little bit different. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And based on that, how can students help each other? Marks and grades are only one way to track your students' progress. Consider other aspects of being a successful language learner, such as engagement. Do they pay attention, right? Do they enjoy learning a language? That's really important, even if they're not doing so well, if they enjoy it, right? Are they asking questions? And are you encouraging them to ask questions? Are they sharing ideas when they learn something new? Are they excited about it, and do they share? The fifth one is learning and forgetting. This is something my PhD advisor wrote. He said, students not only learn, they also forget. And it simply means this. It simply means that, of course they forget, so we have to revise. So all students need to review or revise, but some need it more than others, and for some topics more than others. So shift responsibility to the student, making them aware that they need to keep going through their books to guarantee they've learned something and remember. And do that by what I said earlier. Go back to the review and say, try that again, look at it again, right? See what you know. Okay, 7, here we're at our last point. Teaching every student. I have to be honest and tell you why I put this in here. I had a really disturbing conversation after a webinar last week with a teacher in Prague. And she was having many Ukrainian students who had been displaced by war. And she said, I just couldn't get their attention because, they're so upset all the time. And all they're thinking about is, when can I go home? It was so sad. It made me think about this story that I've told before. Maybe you've heard it. A doctor and a teacher say, what happens? What happens? One woman comes in with a cat scratch on her finger to the hospital, right? Oh, my cat scratched my finger, right? Somebody else has been in a car accident, broken arms, broken legs, concussion, count out, something like that. The question is, who would the doctor treat first? The cat scratch lady or the person in the car accident? It's a stupid question. Of course, the person in the car accident. But the real question is this: who does the teacher treat? And too often, we spend a lot of time on our best students, and the other ones we say, oh, yeah, they're just not very smart or something. That's not what happens. We all have students in need. Sometimes those are less able students. Sometimes they're dyslexic students. Sometimes hearing or visually impaired students. Sometimes the digital divide who don't have the access to technology, and students with other issues. So what about this? What do we do? All of this can seem like too much. I mean, most of us are struggling just to cover the bases, especially over these past 2 years of COVID and everything else. Teaching the basics is stressful and time consuming enough without having to worry about other issues. But teaching is a profession because we do what is right. We do as much as we can for every single student, not just the top students, right? It's for everyone. So what are some of the problems we face? Hearing and visually impaired students. Such students are most often identified not by their parents, but by their teachers. It's an interest. True. It's true. Parents will say something like, oh, he's so clumsy. He's always bumping into things, right? Sometimes that's because they can't see. And their vision, they need glasses. And that's why they're always bumping into things. I've heard this myself. She never listens. I have to call her a dozen times, right? Maybe it's because she has a hearing impairment, right? And parents never realize this because the kids are born, they raise up, and they get used to it, right? So early identification is important. Are students straining to see the board? Are they squinting? Are they leaning too close to their books? Maybe they need glasses or something. Are students often ignoring you and others? Do they need to make eye contact before they answer a question or understand a question? Maybe they have some hearing problems. So you just to put it out there, sometimes you're the one who has to recognize those things. Dyslexic students is amazingly common, dyslexia. And so often nobody recognizes. They said, no, he doesn't like reading, or he finds reading boring, or, I buy him books, but he never bothers reading them and things like that. Dyslexia is on a continuum. Sometimes it's really severe. And of course, that's the one where they can't read anything at all. That gets picked up fairly quickly, but further along the continuum, sometimes it's a mild case, and they have a lot of problems decoding text because they can't read it properly. For affected students, letters and numbers, they appear to be dancing on the page. It's just difficult to understand. Consider whether students have particular problems with similar shaped letters, such as B and P. Similar shapes, but B, a P, and a D. They can be confused by students with dyslexia. If you have them, consider downloading the free dyslexia-friendly computer fonts and encourage their parents to use them as well. This is one example, Open Dyslexic. It's free. You can just download it. And you can see the letters are shaped quite differently, but they're shaped that way to make it easier for dyslexic students to read. The fourth one is the digital divide thing. So some students will always have better access to technology at home. They're richer. They come from, better social, or the parents just value technology more. Are there inequalities in your classroom? Are there solutions? Are things like mobile phones, computer tablets, and Wi-Fi necessities in your classroom? Are they human rights, really, in some ways? If you have problems with this, where there's an unequal distribution, talk to others at your school and share your concerns. Maybe somebody in the community can help. Maybe somebody has an extra computer they can donate or something. Students with other issues. There's a lot of different issues. Each student is an individual. Many face issues ranging from different family groupings. There's not a father or a mother at home, to being torn from their friends, their family, and countries because of war, like the Ukrainian students right now. Some problems are temporary, some are lifelong. Know your students. It's the most we can do. All our students have different issues of some kinds. They're all individuals. They're all different. Get to know them. That's the most important advice I can give today. Okay, so what do we know? There's many teaching and learning challenges in listening and speaking. Fluency is a key goal. Young learners listen and speak for many reasons, but mostly for social approval. Reading and writing impacts on listening and speaking. Listen, then speak, then read, then write. Remember the sequence. We need to teach every student, regardless of the challenges that they face. It's our job. That's why we're professionals. Thank you very much. Okay.